As Scott mentioned, the Michael you know was not the one I met, though. He was a very different man. I met him at a very low ebb in his life. He had been in the hospital for over a year at that point, getting stomach operations and then being weaned from medication. And they also at that point determined, these doctors that were dealing with him, that his medical problem was not medical, it was psychological, and he was inventing all of this in his head, and the best thing he could do was to stop making himself be sick, which is where I met him, very sort of, starting over again and very, very worried about what he was going to do next. And he happened to come across me at a very similar time in my life. I had gone to Boston and was attempting to work. I just graduated from college and was attempting to find work in my field. And looking back in retrospect, I made a mistake. I was trying to find work in a media market, and I chose one that was too large. You don't get started in a very tough competitive environment like that. And so things were going nowhere, and I was working nights for Time Life Books, actually, and doing telephone solicitation to earn some money. So I was one of those annoying people who calls you up during your dinner and tries to pitch you. And I hated the job, and they ran the place like a sweatshop. It was miserable, and I wanted to come up to Montreal in March to spend my mother's birthday with her that year. So I asked for some time off at work, and they said I couldn't have it. And I said, well, in that case, adios. And I walked out the door. And I came up to Montreal, and I spent March 14th with my mother and father and my family. And then when that was over, I returned to Boston, jobless, prospectless, and still wondering what the heck I'm doing here. And it was just a short, 10, 15 days later that there was a knock on my door, and there was Michael, also just starting over. And this is the way life is that two people, their paths cross, and you could, spend a little time and bounce off of each other and go off, or you can, form a bond and keep going together. And that's what we did for 30 years. We were each other's best friend, confidant, and we grew and changed together a lot, an awful lot. When Michael met me, I was a withdrawn, quiet person who was not very open with my emotions and very open with my feelings. And Michael, in his way of talking to me, was able to get me to express myself better and open up my heart a little more and be a better person, basically. And as his medical needs changed and grew, he drew something out of me that I didn't know was in there, and that was my ability to care for someone and to help them through very, very difficult times. And Michael had a lot of difficult times, and I wanted to share one particular story with you because it's a picture of Michael's tenacity. Shortly after I met him, he fell down and broke his wrist, and it was just a routine situation. They set it in a pin and plaster cast. Unfortunately, the pin that they put in was not sterile, and the bone became infected, and he got a condition from that known as osteomyelitis, and had to go through multiple debridement operations on his arm. I mean, they cut open a canoe-shaped hole in there and cleaned it out. They'd let it cure a bit, and they'd open it up again and clean it out again just to make sure they got rid of every last bit of the incurring infection. And he just went through months and months of hospitalization in Cambridge City Hospital, where they were cutting into him on an almost an every other day basis. And I would go and visit him there and see him, and he was wearing one of those Hoffman catheters that keeps everything all straightened out and held in place. And they sealed the whole thing up in late December, feeling that he would be well enough now to undergo an operation, which was extremely experimental at that point. where they were going to take the bone, you know, in your lower part of your leg, you have 2 bones. They were going to take the bone out of his leg and transplant it into his arm after they took out what was left of his radius. And this is a 16-hour operation, which they have to do microsurgery to connect all the nerve endings because they want your hand and your arm to operate normally. And they'd only done the operation once before at that point. This is 1983 in Great Britain. And the doctor who did, his name was Jesse Jupiter, had observed on that operation. He was stationed in Mass General Hospital. And he said to Michael, this is an extremely experimental operation. I've only observed one, I've never done one. And you know, it's 16 hours long, and if it doesn't work, we're going to have to amputate your arm.
Oh.
And Michael said, well, what happens if you don't do it? He said, well, if we don't do it, we're going to have to amputate your arm. You know, so his response at that point, well, you know, you can amputate it now, or if things go wrong, you can amputate it later. Let's try it. And so they did. So they closed him up in the Cambridge City Hospital and sent him home for Christmas. And I brought him up to Montreal that year to spend Christmas with my family. And then we went back to Boston, and he checked into Mass General Hospital, and they put him through this 16-hour operation. And he was supposed to convalesce after this operation in the hospital for about 2.5 weeks. Well, one of the things that anyone who knows Michael and lived with his medical situations is Michael could, you know, go down, 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 and then suddenly on a dime turn around and just be so much better, so much stronger, and so much healthier looking. And I say the word looking, of course, is the key to it all at once. He had incredible ability to rebound. And 2 days after the operation, when they were still, you know, concerned about how everything was settling and all that, he wanted to come home. He wanted to get out of the hospital, he wanted to come home and be with me. Now, I didn't know about this, and he was at Mass General. We were living on Beacon Hill at that point, the backside of Beacon Hill. And it was February, which even in Boston is very icy and very cold. And he was wearing a cast on his arm and a cast on his leg, and he announced to them that his mother had taken, you invented a story, that his mother had taken an illness, and he had to go down on an emergency basis to go and see her. Could they discharge him now? And Michael could be very persuasive. You know, he didn't take no for an answer easily. And he somehow persuaded them to release him from the hospital, and, you know, have you made arrangements and preparation? Oh, yes, it's all taken care of, all taken care of. And so they released him from the hospital with a pair of crutches that had a bar on it, on the crutch, that came up with a handle so that the arm with his cast, he could work it like that. And he had these 2 crutches and this one with a bar on it. And I guess they asked him if someone was meeting him downstairs, and he said yes, which was not true. And he left the hospital and walked the 3 blocks from Mass General to our apartment. Now, those of you who know Boston know that, you know, when you walk from Mass General to Cambridge Street, normal city block. Anderson Street to our door is a steep 2-block climb. Really steep. He went up there, ice and snow and everything, all the way to the top of the hill where our apartment was, like almost at the lip, you know. Keyed his way into the building, 3 steps up, walked up to the 2nd floor, and when I came home from work, he was sitting in the chair, grinning like a Cheshire cat at this great surprise and accomplishment he did for me. And I was pissed. You know? I said, don't you ever do anything crazy like that again. But, you know, that was Michael. He didn't like being sick, and as soon as he could, he'd move on. You know, and unfortunately, that also took its toll on him as well. As I said, the other speaker who was supposed to be here tonight is Dr. Irving Ingram. When Michael got the settlement for this accident, Michael bought a store, and this was sort of one of his emotional dreams, because growing up he had worked in his uncle's store in the summer and thought that owning a little convenience store would be fun. And so he took the settlement money and he bought a franchise called the White Hen Pantry. And he was going to run this store, and it was going to be a nice job where he could meet people and talk with them and spend time with them. and communicate, which he did. He was one of the most charismatic and interesting store owners you ever had. But if any of you have ever worked in a convenience store, it's a lot of work, and he just wasn't physically up to it. And he started to have stomach problems again, which is what it had ailed him all along, that he had been having the stomach problems, which remained undiagnosed. No one knew what the problem was. And so he checked into Union Hospital, was out in, I'm going to say Peabody, but anyway, in that area. And the doctor who lived in our neighborhood, who had been consulting with him up until that point, called in a consult, Dr. Irving Ingram, who diagnosed that Michael had Crohn's disease. And it was, it was like a door was opened in Michael's life, because finally, this mystery illness that everyone said was all craziness in his head, and he was inventing his pain, and he was inventing this, and he was seeking this and seeking that. He finally understood why he was having pain in his belly off and on, and why he kept on getting sick and weak. And it really took a weight off of him. But up until that point, Michael was he even said himself, he was someone who was looking for something. He was very tense and very nervous, and as Scott told you, he grew up in a household where he said it was quite routine that the family argument would result in suitcases being pulled out and opened in the bed, and clothes being thrown in, I'm leaving, and all that, and very, very ugly, dramatic scenes. And this is what he grew up with. And when I met Michael, he was very tense, very nervous, and very, very on edge. And he chewed his nails incredibly. And I just could tell right away that Michael needed to calm down and relax. And I like to feel that that's what I brought to him, because when I first met him, he told me he didn't think he'd live past 40. And he certainly was on a trajectory at that point that he may not have made it much longer than 40. He was having a lot of difficulty. And to me, the greatest gift I could give Michael was a sense of calm and serenity, and an opportunity to feel that he was in a protected and safe environment, and that someone was going to look out for him and care for him. And I did that for him, and he made it to 64, and they were wonderful years. But there was a transition point that he did go through, here in Montreal actually. Because after we gave the store, because Irv said that if he stayed in the store it was going to kill him, which was true, we came up to Montreal, and as a result of the medications that he was on, the steroids for his Crohn's disease, he developed a situation known as osteonecrosis, which means your bone joints start to die. And one by one, he had to replace a hip, then the other hip, and then the first hip again, because the osteomyelitis came back, and they had to take it out and debride that and let it sit idle for about 6 months. And then the same thing happened to his knees. And over that period, Michael was forced first into a wheelchair and was able to walk with a cane, and then had to go back into the wheelchair as his joints continued to degenerate. But he did say that one time when we were going to the Place des Arts, that I left him there, drove up, put him in the wheelchair, and said, I will park the car and I'll come back and join you. And he was wheeling himself around, and there was an anger and a frustration in him, that he said that he just really felt that this wasn't fair, that why was he stuck here in this chair with all this pain and all these problems. And he said that something just sort of came over him, that this was what he had to live with, and not to let it bother him anymore. And he made this enormous transition. I was shocked and quite worried at first, because I thought he had some kind of a breakdown, because that anxiety and that nervousness disappeared overnight. He became calm, relaxed, and comfortable in his own skin for the first